Welcome to the Climate Hive show, What Do You Solve? Where we get to engage with global innovators in the forefront of climate solutions. I'm Kevin Drolet, aka Kedro, and I'm here with my Climate Hive co-founder and co-host, Mike Higgins, aka Higo. And our guests today are from Therm, a company tackling super pollutants in the food supply chain. This is super important and probably well underreported. So we're really excited to talk to Therm. And our guest, John Tinsley, and he's the vice president co-founder of Therm. John is actually an award-winning driver of food supply chain decarbonization through high-impact super pollutant projects. He has more than a decade of experience in energy efficiency and emissions reduction strategies. At Therm, John leads market engagement for the company's carbon credits, helping organizations invest in immediate, verifiable climate action. Prior to Therm, he worked at McKinstry and Dalkia, which I probably might pronounce wrong, Energy Solutions, where he developed large-scale decarbonization strategies across the built environment. So with that as an intro, thank you so much for joining us, John, and I will pass it over to my good man, Higo.
Thanks for having me.
So good to have you. Thanks. Hey, I wondered if this show is really about the discovery of the problem, right? That's where we like to start. And we call that the aha moment, because there was a world before Therm, right? And then there was people who noticed a problem, who were informed, educated about it, and decided, well, we can do something about this. We have this capability. We have to get together and all the complications of business, but you come together and you have an aha moment. So there was the pre-world, the moment, and then there's the post-world, which is the world now. So we're super interested to hear the story of that discovery of the problem and then your solution and that aha moment.
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, as Kevin said on the intro, Therm's mission is to target super pollutants in the food supply chain. We use carbon credits as a tool to do that. And just for brief background, super pollutants are things like refrigerants or methane, things that have a massive climate impact, but also things that are found in almost every grocery store, every food manufacturing facility, every dairy farm in the world that keep our food cold or that are a result of our food's production and sale. And so I said almost every grocery store because Therm is working on changing that on a daily basis. But to get to your question about how did we stumble into this problem, how do we decide it was a problem we wanted to solve? This really came out of previous business, Dalkia, which was founded by Fritz Troller, our CEO, and John Gerster, our chairman. And as part of that company, we were working with these folks in the food supply chain every single day. And that company was focused on energy efficiency and renewables projects. And we were saying, hey, look, we're having this great impact. We're really reducing your emissions related to energy. But as we got closer to folks in the food supply chain, we had this realization that almost 65% of their scope one emissions were directly related to just leaking refrigerant from these massive refrigeration systems that they have. And we said, look, we know folks in the space, there's got to be something that we can do about that. And that's what led us into Therm.
Question between carbon credits and then doing away with that source, right? And so why don't you talk to us a little bit about on both sides of that coin, right? One is here's a credit to offset this stuff that we're using, and then on the other side is let's stop using it, and where are you guys on that spectrum?
Yeah, so we view carbon credits and we use them every day as a tool to incentivize folks to stop using, in this case, refrigerants, for instance. And so really it's a financial tool. I think we look at really any market, but especially the food supply chain. It's a world where margins are very thin and the focus is on typically not so much on climate, it's on selling groceries and transporting groceries and keeping as many of them cold throughout the process as possible. And so really carbon credits are the financial tool to incentivize the change to action. And the way that we implement them is we essentially attack various aspects of what causes refrigerants to leak or which refrigerants are used. And so again, we're taking money using it in a pretty dollar sensitive market and using that to drive climate action is typically the approach we use.
Yeah, it's great. So, because without those credits as a catalyst, those dollars probably wouldn't be made available for you guys to go in and solve the problem, right? Which is the leaks and the emit of these chemicals.
Exactly. Yeah, history tells us to get into some nerdy engineering numbers, but the average grocery store has something like 3,500 pounds of refrigerant at the store, and history tells us that will leak at a 25% rate per year. And so I think we all sit here and say, hey, that's really bad. It's equivalent to something like taking 2,500 flights from LAX to JFK every year at every grocery store in the US. We'd say, hey, like certainly someone will just do something about that. But we've seen like history shows, no, that's not the case. These systems are viewed, as a utility. A grocer's mission and goal is to sell groceries, right? We as consumers walk into a grocery store, we expect to see everything looking perfect, excess product everywhere on the shelves. Product is kept perfectly cool, which is obviously important from a product preservation and loss standpoint. And I think most of us don't really think about this just looming specter in the background, which is, hey, it takes refrigeration systems and it takes refrigerants to do all this and to give us the results that we expect as consumers and to maintain product as cold to keep us all safe as well. And so it's just, hey, assumed like this is part of doing business.
Yeah, one of the things that I found so fascinating about what you guys do is like whenever I think of like greenhouse gases, right? Like you think about CO2 or like you think of methane, but then there's like in refrigerants, there's actually like all of these really dangerous, and some of them from a time standpoint, they're closer to methane, where the immediacy of the dangers, I understand it, is much more acute. And so I was just wanted to get your take also on, why is this overlooked? Why do you think people are not, you know, focusing in at all on greenhouse gases that are coming from, refrigeration, which is it's pretty massive, right? Globally, it's a
Yeah.
speaking to.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, the average refrigerant used in a grocery store has a what's called global warming potential of 4,000, which is essentially saying, hey, the higher the number, the worse it is for the climate when it leaks. And compare that to CO2 with a global warming potential of one, right? So 4,000 times worse for a refrigerant to leak than CO2. And yeah, really, I think it's twofold. So one, to go back to the consumer expectation, right? We as consumers walk into a store and we're focused on buying groceries, right? Like we're saying, hey, are the groceries, is it cold enough? And I think the average person doesn't have a view into how that happens or what is making the groceries cold. They're just like, hey, it's a refrigerator like in my house. It keeps things cold. I don't know. It probably uses energy. Not sure. So I think there's like a consumer awareness piece there. And then I think on the business side too, like for grocers, again, like their core business is selling groceries. That's their focus. Refrigerants and refrigeration systems, that's a tool for them to sell groceries. And it's really they view it a lot like a utility, right? You say, hey, is my power on? Is that keeping my house warm? The same thing in a grocery store where they're saying, hey, is my refrigeration system working? Is it keeping the groceries cold? And that's kind of a yes or no question, really, right? And so um, there's not typically a lot of thought given to, okay, it's keeping my groceries cold. How much refrigerant is leaking when that happens? How much refrigerant is being put into that? That might be like the first level, right? Because refrigerant does cost a little bit of money, so maybe they're tracking that. But the second piece beyond that is like, okay, now what's the climate impact of that, right? And we know that that's huge. But again, when your focus is, hey, we're very slim margin business, we're trying to sell groceries, we're trying to do that in a way that's profitable in an incredibly competitive market. Um, some of the climate things at times slip to the background.
No,
Yeah,
I, I can,
one of the things I love also about this concept, because on this show we sort of talk about people solving things, but they're trying to solve them in the real world. It's not necessarily, it's like they've created a business and they're trying to solve a problem. And this is something you don't have to have like, I'm a, climate person to be part of this solution here. This is just makes sense. Like you come in, hey, your refrigerant is leaking, you're losing money because of that, you're losing food because of that. Oh, by the way, if we fix that, you get a carbon credit, and by the way, you're also reducing greenhouse gases. So like that's a pretty solid win-win-win, right? Like, and what's traction been like for you? Like, how's the business gone for you guys?
Yeah, it's gone very well. But I think to talk through how we got to traction is a bit interesting, right? Because there's two pieces here, right? We talked about the awareness on, hey, just refrigerants are a climate problem piece. There's also an awareness of carbon credits are a climate solution tool. And I think generally in the climate world, folks are familiar with offsets or incentives or things like that at a high level. When you pull that into an industry, like a specific industry, the awareness is typically zero, right? I don't think prior to Therm, any grocer was aware, hey, we could be getting incentivized by carbon credits to do climate projects at our stores. And so I think that really there's quite a bit of education around that and truly trust building. I think, part of the carbon markets as they evolve and as we work to help folks understand what it truly incentivizes action at scale is there's a little bit of a trust me aspect where you say, hey, make this investment in this climate friendly system and the carbon credits will pay for your difference in cost. And I think it takes time, especially in new markets, to build that trust where a grocer's saying, that's great, but how many people have done this before? And when the number is small, it the number of people who are willing to say, great, I'll take the risk is small, right? And as we've built up trust by doing this, at thousands of locations, that has gotten a lot easier. But the initial, like, hey, we got to find some really good partners who really know us and trust us as people, was a really critical starting point.
yeah, I'm thinking about my own grocery store. It's a Kroger grocery store, so it's a Kroger asset. It's got to be 150,000 square feet. The thing is massive, and
Yeah.
it has massive refrigeration all over the store in the deli, and I mean it's everywhere. I can't even imagine what that costs. But one thing that Kroger's never, they don't advertise at all or even promote the fact that they're doing anything for, clean tech, alternative energies, those types of things. Can you see that evolving as a value proposition from you guys that they can, market the fact that they're, tackling this real problem, and using that as a way to, because there's a lot of competition, right? For grocery, ton. In
Yeah.
my little area here outside of Denver, Colorado, I mean, you got a Target, you got a Walmart, got a Whole Foods, right? We got a Trader Joe's, and we got Kroger's. It's like it's really competitive.
Yeah, I have four grocery stores, I think, within a half mile of our home. And you're right. I think the marketing piece in grocery and the kind of community trust piece is critical, right? Like some stores have products or things that you like, and that's why you go there. But a lot of it is just like, hey, do I like this brand? Do I feel good about spending, my dollars here on products? And so yeah, I think there is a marketing aspect for some that is compelling. I think it depends to what extent they want to focus on that with their consumer base, and really it does come down to a bit of a trade, right? So with the carbon world, we are typically targeting folks who are either not aware or not ultra interested in marketing that aspect of their businesses, right? And these are folks who are, saying, look, if you give me dollars from carbon finance, I will change my behavior, right? Or hey, you made me aware of a problem I can solve. Like, great, let's tackle it, but how do I pay for it, right? That's really the big problem that we have to solve from a grocer standpoint and other folks within the food supply chain. And so I think there's some benefits to talking about it and marketing it, and we would love to see more of that. And to some extent, we do see it a little bit in the market, but I think unfortunately or fortunately for kind of our model, like the dollars drive the action, right? And so that's the piece that we are leaning into from a business standpoint.
That makes
So
sense.
it's similar, right? Like to the decisions we make for solar, right? Like I got solar in my house. Like love the fact that I have solar. Mike and I were talking about like, you feel good, right? Like, but you're also saving money, right? Like what's the driving factor behind these behavioral changes is that they're actually, better for people. I wanted to come back to also, John, just ask you about the question of trust, because I think people like there's sort of layers. Like on one level, a lot of people don't even understand what a carbon, market is, right? Like what's that? Certainly, I think, in some spaces, carbon market is like, you're buying some forest being built somewhere in South America, right? So nobody even thinks about, like a grocery store being a carbon marketplace or that these offsets. But credibility then is also a big thing because there have been unevenness in, how credible are those carbon credits. Um, you guys got an A rating from B Zero Carbon recently, I think. And I just, maybe you could talk about like what does that mean in the space? Do the people you're talking about, do the grocery stores have an idea of credit rating? Do they push back on it? Like, what does that A rating mean for you guys?
Yeah. So the short answer is it's a buyer demand driver. And what I mean by buyer, so we work with grocery stores to issue carbon credits, create them on their behalf. And then we find folks within the environmental commodities markets to buy those carbon credits. And it's really a financial tool, right, for transferring dollars from those who are climate motivated to those who are doing the projects. Like you said, forests in Brazil or, various any number of other projects. And so from a to answer your initial question, yeah, the carbon markets frankly have evolved and continue to evolve. And I think the message that we work with as we go through this is not letting perfect get in the way of good and get in the way of impact. And so the reason for credit agencies, rating agencies, and also for a number of other, what we call them quality indicators in the market, is that frankly, like unlike certain other commodities or even things, carbon markets are still evolving in terms of the way that credible credits get dollars, and also in terms of the way that we all agree as to what is a credible and quality credit. And so for us at Therm, we've, to your point, had a couple credits projects rated by a rating agency called B Zero. And really what they do as part of the process is they do a deep dive into all the aspects of the project, right? Hey, is this project permanent? Like, could this be reversed tomorrow? Hey, how clean is the quantification, right? I think with the projects we work on, it's the math and the backup is very straightforward, right? We're pulling essentially engineering documentation or like very clean invoices and can use that information to prove our climate claims. Like that gets a lot more challenging with other markets, right? Like you can't measure every single tree, though they're getting a lot better at it, which is exciting. And so there's that aspect, and then a whole kind of swath of other things. We're essentially doing due diligence on a project as a good buyer would do due diligence on a similar project, but they're doing it on behalf of everyone to give that rating. And so I think for us, it's something that we have a lot of buyers of carbon credits approach us saying, hey, we want A-rated credits, we want A-rated projects. So that's hugely valuable for the grocery partners that we work with on those projects. Again, it drives demand for folks to buy their projects. And then I think the second piece is it builds credibility around the whole sector, right? So when a project gets a very good rating, I think a lot of people take a look and say, hey, why aren't we doing more of this? How do we incentivize more action related to this? And we've seen a recent push specific to super pollutants, and also the work that we're doing where folks are saying, look, like this is something I haven't heard of before, but it seems to be getting really good quality reviews. And B, this seems like something that's everywhere. Like, why aren't we doing more of this? And so all those things come back to us being able to point to something that's simple, right? Hey, it's an A, right? I think we all say, hey, you got an A on the test. That's great.
Right?
For us, being able to point so, hey, our project's got an A. These couple projects that have been rated, every single one that we've had rated got an A. Like, that's really critical from a brand standpoint for just driving more dollars into this type of project.
The question in my mind is, why would anyone ever say no to this? I mean, this sounds like the biggest no-brainer ever. You're coming
Yeah.
and basically saying we're going to self-fund your ability to impact this environmental problem. How could anybody not say, yeah, let's do it?
Yeah, I think it's a theme of this conversation, right? And part of why we're interested in having conversations like this. A lot of it comes down to awareness, right? So a carbon buyer, a large corporate who is intending to buy typically a portfolio of credits, there's a good chance they've never heard of refrigeration. Or if you said, hey, refrigerants, super pollutants, they would have this vision of like a big, ugly industrial facility somewhere in the middle of nowhere, right? And they're looking at this and they're saying, well, how am I going to put a picture of this on, you know, my sustainability report, right? Like this is like, hey, trees look great. Blue carbon, mangroves look great. Like a lot of these things look great, are easily understandable and tangible. And so a lot of it's, breaking through there. And look, I like for us, we think we have a great solution. I guess we know we have a great solution.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, it's a complicated market, right? Like preserving forests is incredibly critical.
Mhm.
Growing mangroves, very critical. Like all of these other climate solutions are incredibly important. And so a lot of it is, becoming a priority in the eyes of folks with dollars who can help us drive action.
Yeah, I think when I first learned about you all, I think that was the aha moment for me in a ways. I didn't think about like, greenhouse gases leaking from, refrigeration of a grocery store. It just it's sort of not in the it's unfortunate actually. It's not in the discussion, right? It's like it's not in the discussion at all, really. In fact, a lot of people think greenhouse gases is just CO2s, like even that part of it. So there's like these nuances of discussion, but then we get on a deeper level and it's like, here's this other super pollutants, as they're called, and people don't think about that everyday thing because it's really hard like to get people to adopt new technology that's going to be good for the environment, or it's hard to get, as great as solar is, to get it on all the roofs and everything. But this type of solution where it's like all we got to do is it's a win-win kind of all around. But then we run into this awareness thing of people just don't know. And then they're also not familiar, many people purchasing carbon credits are not thinking refrigeration and stuff. Um, can you give us just like a small education on the actual like what greenhouse gases are coming out of like how often do refrigerators leak? Like what's that picture look like?
Yeah. Yeah. So Mike described his 150,000 square foot Kroger, right? And I think we can probably all envision this, right? You walk into your grocery store, like, hey, the produce is way over on the left wall. Seafood and meat are way over on the right wall. Maybe there's, dairy in the back, and then you have like your frozen refrigeration in the middle. And so like you think of that and you're like, hey, I got to walk to all these different places to get my cold food. The reality of what's happening there is there's piping full of refrigerant running to all those different locations in the building. And then that piping is attached to essentially fans that are shaking it constantly, which is just how the refrigeration process works, right? And so, yeah, essentially that shaking causes refrigerants to leak. It causes them to leak constantly. This isn't a one-time thing where you just go in and you say, "Hey, we fixed the leaks. It's all good. It's a sealed system. They're never going to leak again." It's a constant problem and it requires a pretty constant solution. And so, um, the two solutions that are most obvious, so one, existing stores. There's 44,000 existing grocery stores in the US, something along those lines. Uh, if we said, hey, grocers, just change the refrigerant you're using, like just real quick, no big deal. You're talking about a massive capital investment. And again, like this is a very challenging market, very thin margins, et cetera. So to drive climate impact at that scale is pretty darn hard. And so the easiest short-term solution is to focus on catching leaks early
Mhm.
and fixing them. And like I said, that's a constant thing, but there technology exists to do this. So that's one of the easiest things we can do today at scale to make change. And then the second piece is to target what refrigerants they're using, right? So if a refrigerant didn't have a high climate impact, it wouldn't matter if it leaked, right? If it's just water evaporating, like, hey, no climate impact, who cares? And so that's the second piece that we really target is, hey, when you're making a decision about what refrigeration system to put in your store, let's target the one that has little to no climate impact. Because it's not a matter of will it leak? I described this whole network of pipes connected to shaking fans, right? It will leak. And so if it has no impact when it leaks, that's the goal.
And those alternatives exist, huh? Those like non-environmentally impactful refrigerant
Yeah.
alternatives, and they're roughly the same cost?
Yeah, so they are typically a little bit more expensive, and that's what we are attacking with the carbon finance dollars. We're saying, hey, what if they weren't more expensive? Like
Right.
would uh would that make a change in the way that you adopt?
Well,
Do, do
refrigeration, with what I know about it, which is not much, but those systems are pressurized, right? So they're closed, with the stuff moving through it. So when there's a leak, it never self-heals, right? So it makes no sense to keep putting the refrigerant in there because it's just spraying out wherever the gaps are in the system, and it makes the whole system less efficient. So are you guys, do you roll trucks then to your grocery stores and have people that are physically like, part of your team that are keeping an eye on, where the leaks and then repairing them? That's part of your ongoing service?
Yeah, so our business is focused on incentivizing and quantifying the action, and then we partner with
Okay.
a large network of folks who physically either install leak detection and do repairs or do the physical infrastructure upgrades, et cetera. And it's the grocery market's hugely fragmented in terms of just a million different brands and ownership groups. And similarly, the service and solution provider market is pretty fragmented as well. And so the easiest way to drive change in that market is through partnership. I think if we tried to go to every grocery store in the US, we'd get nowhere.
I was curious, why don't grocery store owners, are they not concerned about leaking like from refrigeration? Is that not cost them, or is that something they just kind of like, how does that fit into their budgets and to-do lists? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, so refrigeration is typically viewed as utility, right? So it's you're looking more at, hey, am I seeing big changes in cost uh, more than anything? So if you're not seeing a big change in the cost of your refrigerant, you're probably not worried about it. And then the second piece is it's relatively inexpensive, right? This isn't a huge budget line item, and depending on the relationship, it can actually be priced into their maintenance contracts as well. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to pay somebody to fix my system when it breaks, add refrigerant when I need to. And, as a grocery owner, like you're like, hey, we're selling groceries, right? Just let me know if there's a catastrophic issue with this system, but otherwise, not a huge focus, right? And I think there's also a subset of grocers who are saying like, look, I would love to do something about this. I know it is a problem. And it costs, frankly, it costs money, right? To make the kind of change that would have a substantial climate impact. And so I think those few things combined to lead us to the 25% average annual leak rate of refrigerant in grocery stores.
Wow. It's 25%. Wow.
Annual per store. I mean, I'm glad that that was a problem you recognize and a problem you're doing something about because it sounds substantial.
It is it's truly staggering, yeah, as you put together the numbers.
Well, and on your website, we've really been focusing on refrigeration, but your website also mentions food waste diversion. So you guys are, you're more than the refrigerant problem. You're looking at other problems because food
Yeah.
waste is a big problem. Can you just at a high level, tell us, what you guys are doing in food waste diversion?
Yeah, so to your point, food waste is a huge problem. A very substantial percentage of food that enters our supply chain is wasted. It is truly staggering. And this similar to refrigeration or refrigerants, this is something where the solutions exist. It's really about behavioral and financial change to drive them. But yeah, if you think about, again, you walk into your grocery store, you go to the produce section, there's probably a giant rack of just perfect apples, right? Fully full every time you walk in. Doesn't really matter what time of day it is. Uh, and the reality behind that is, hey, there were a whole bunch of bad apples that didn't make it to the store. And also, there's a whole bunch of apples that are never going to make it to someone's home because they went bad before they could be sold. And then, of course, there's the consumer side of waste, which is also a huge problem where a massive percentage of the food that enters our homes exits as waste, right? And so, really, when all this food enters the landfill and breaks down, it turns into methane, right, which is a super pollutant. And while not as bad, not nearly as bad as refrigerants from a climate impact standpoint for per molecule, it is still hugely impactful and hugely prevalent everywhere. And so, really, the work that we're doing there is targeting it again, mostly like at the retail and distribution levels, where we're saying, hey, you have a lot of surplus food. The easiest thing for you to do is put it in the landfill. We see this every day.
Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of other solutions that we could target here. And a lot of, some of them are things, just simple things like, hey, plan your inventory a little bit differently, or hey, send it to compost instead of to the landfill, or anaerobic digestion, or any number of solutions. But some of them also have this like real human element too, right? Where it's like there's a huge opportunity to donate more food, get that food into food pantries, get that food, into people's mouths. And this is, I think, for us, we get most excited about when climate impact has human impact as well. And this is a perfect example, right? It's like, hey, we're solving a climate problem. We're also feeding people, right? That's
Yeah.
important and really exciting, I think, for us as well.
So you're able to get dollars from carbon offsets for that, and then use those dollars to fund, the extra work required to do something with this waste other than just throw it in a dumpster. Is that the basic cycle?
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of, some of it is physical infrastructure or logistical infrastructure. A lot of it's behavioral change, right? Like if I'm a grocery store owner that owns 300 grocery stores, I'm employing a lot of people, and to change behavior for a huge number of people related to something that, frankly doesn't drive revenue for them, it's a lift, right? And a big challenge.
Yeah, I think that's the brilliance of your model is to offset the expense because it's inconvenient, right? But that's just
Yep.
that change. Change is always inconvenient until it becomes how we do things,
Yeah.
right? And it is remarkable, even the amount of food that never makes it to the store distribution because the apple isn't beautiful enough. It's not big enough. It's not round enough. They've got all these standards, right? So much food doesn't even qualify. I don't even know what happens to that food, but maybe all it ends up in the landfill, or maybe it goes to, the companies that make juice and,
Yep.
apple pies.
Yeah, exactly. There are a whole bunch of different avenues that it goes. But there's certainly a lot of opportunities for improvement. And I think that's the most exciting about our business is when we stumble upon something like this, where we say, wait a second, the solution exists. People are not doing it. Why are they not doing it? And the answer is, hey, if they just had a little more money that incentivized them to do it, they would. That's where we start to get really excited.
I wanted maybe on this last discussion that we've been having, a lot of it makes me think of circular economy and that, we start to change our thinking about, waste. And Mike and I have had some great discussions with other companies where waste then becomes commodity. Waste is not waste. It actually becomes something useful. But can you give us a sense of how you all think about this at Therm, circular economy, how you fit into that, some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of examples. I think the easiest one is on the refrigerant side again, which we do work with what's called reclaiming refrigerants. And so essentially that I outlined two problems, right? Hey, refrigerants are leaking. That's bad. We should stop them from leaking, right? Hey, but they are going to leak to some extent. So let's change the impact of what happens when they leak by using a different refrigerant. The third piece is, hey, if you do a project, you change the refrigerant that's in your system. What are you doing with that old refrigerant? And
Hmm.
uh, the circular economy piece here is, I think it's the stat is 2 to 3% of all refrigerant is reclaimed and recycled and put back into the market. And so that's something that we work on incentivizing as well, where we say, look, that percentage is way too low. It should be, frankly, 100%. But so when you pull refrigerant out, if it can, if it's refrigerant that's still in production, right, where we say, look, if we don't recycle this, more is going to be manufactured. Uh, get that cleaned up and back into the market so you reduce demand for brand new refrigerants and kind of keep that process moving.
The refrigerant doesn't degrade, does it? It just leaks. Isn't that why they need more? Because I mean, your refrigerant presumably would last forever, unless, of course, it's getting out of the closed system. Is that true?
That's right. Yeah. If it didn't leak, refrigerant would not be a problem. And to your point, we have absolutely plenty of it. We would not need to make. I think our head of marketing, Emily, did a study on this. I think she found out we would not need to make any more refrigerant, possibly ever, if we could efficiently recycle everything that we already have, and if we could reduce our leak rates substantially.
And so what is refrigerant? Like, what's the chemical? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah. Are you looking for like examples of what common refrigerants are?
Yeah, like what would I be familiar with? Like, is it a
Yeah, I
gas?
think
Like,
the name that's most common, and this is an older refrigerant, but is Freon. I think
oh yeah, Freon.
that
Yeah.
that I think came to light when we were punching a hole in the ozone layer, and that is actually a previous generation of refrigerants, but that's the most common one that I think everyone knows. So like, hey, I probably have Freon in my AC unit at home in my refrigeration system. So that's a really common one. The other ones have less trendy names, but there's the most common in grocery is R404A. Um,
Oh
and
yeah, R404A. Mike and I were just talking about that.
exactly. Exactly. Uh, yeah, and really, it's these are highly engineered chemicals, right, that enable us to keep food cold efficiently. But unfortunately, they have some very negative impacts from a climate and water pollution standpoint, and so that's the problem, right? It's like, hey, we've solved this need to keep food cold. We're preserving so much more food than we ever have. But unfortunately, there's always a downside, it seems.
Yeah.
Hey, John, one of the things that we hope is a byproduct of this show is that people hear things and then they put it into action, right? Because it's not enough to just know. You got to do something about it. That's what you did to form this whole company. You knew this problem existed, and you decided to do something about it with your partners, right? So you took action. So let me ask, as a consumer, as a person who goes to that 150,000 square foot store, what can I do to take action with this knowledge? I mean, is the starting point to make sure my own air conditioning system isn't leaking? I mean, what can consumers do?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and really two things. One, you can be aware of what refrigerants you're using, whether that's your refrigerator at home or AC unit, etc. That's a direct consumer choice you can make when you put in a heat pump or buy a new refrigerator to say, hey, I want to do a little research and understand like what is the climate impact of what I'm putting into use in my personal life. And I think the second really is it's come up a couple times on this show and kind of is the reason we are here, right? Is awareness. I think this is a huge problem. It's a very solvable problem. And it's one where, as you guys have pointed out as we've talked through, if people are aware of it and they understand, like, we're not talking about a huge amount of dollars to attack some of these aspects of super pollutants in the food supply chain. It's really like, hey, if you're aware of it and and that develops a little bit of a general public awareness, change will happen because frankly, it's a no-brainer.
Fascinating, man. What a fascinating topic. I mean, from a couple of guys who never talk about this. Kevin and I, this is not part of what we talk about on a regular basis. And this is one of the benefits of this show is all the fascinating things we're learning about these problems. You know, it never would occur to me. When I walk into that Giant King Supers, I always think about the electric bill because a lot of those coolers are just open. You know what I mean? They're
Yep.
just open. And I'm thinking, and those things run 24/7. Like how much energy is wasted just blasting out all this cold air, and there's no cover. That
Yep.
that goes through my mind. I never think about the refrigeration that's going through the building, right? The enormity of that problem never even occurred to me.
And I mean, you just described like our career arc, right? Like we said, hey, we should be putting doors on these cases, LED lighting, efficient motors. And then as we got deeper, like, wait a second, there's a much bigger problem here that we're missing. And that's why we're here.
Yeah, well, John, I mean, we totally appreciate that you guys had the wisdom to come up with a brilliant business idea and one that will have a really big impact on climate. And wish you guys lots of success and let us know how we can help. And we'll certainly spread the word. And I'll never, look at a grocery store the same. I'm always going to be looking for leaky refrigerants. What's going on?
General manager, when's the last time you had the
Yeah.
integrity of your
Oh,
charge
well,
system inspected? I want to make sure that you're not leaking that stuff all over the place. What, you got R404A in here?
yeah, exactly. You are 404. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all for having us and for helping to amplify, like we said. It's a huge piece. People just aren't aware. So let's get more folks to think differently when they walk into the store.